In this 9th lecture on collective intelligence, we are going to bring it sort of all together into a model, which is basically the whole point with this book and this theory. Like I said earlier, we believe that in order for people to be able to work collectively intelligent with a higher level of awareness, they would have to have an agreed upon idea on how intelligence is created. And we hope that this model may help that process. So here's the model. We're talking about, or we're thinking about this as being 4 capabilities of a team that when they interact, they create the level of collective intelligence that this team is able to achieve. So it's a dynamic thing. It's factors interacting with each other. But if you want to simplify the model a bit, you can say that it's showing here, let me draw while I talk. You could say that this is sort of the intelligence in collective intelligence, or the knowledge integration factors. Knowledge can be integrated in teams in 2 ways. One is the learning process or reflection process, where people exchange thoughts and knowledge in order to create new thoughts and knowledge. The other way of integrating knowledge, well, in that's here called representation capability. It's not a matter of creating new knowledge primarily, but enacting knowledge, collective knowledge as a team, to create a team or a system in which the different parts are aware of each other and therefore can act as if they are a bigger object than their individual actions, so to say. They act as if they're a team. And we've been through all this and how these different forms of knowledge integration actually have different things driving them, different factors supporting whether they reach a high level or not. So if that's the intelligence in collective intelligence, this other part here is, you could say in a sense, what is a collective thing. A collective thing always can be looked upon from 2 different perspectives. It can be as a team, for example. You can see that as a team, as a unit or an object, or you know, which here is represented by relationship capability, because that's all about ultimately what kind of pattern this collective thing displays. You can talk about a group or a team as being warm or efficient or confused and so on, and then you're sort of talking about the team as an object. Your reference is to the entire team. But then that's one way of looking at the collective thing. The other way is, of course, to look at the parts that creates the sum, which is here called integration capability. A group can always be viewed as the result of all the individual actions. And you remember in the last lecture we talked about discretionary behavior. So of course if the entire team acts with a very high level of heed, they're very attentive, aware, present, focused, really trying to make this work, you will have that can be translated into a team capability, high performing team, or at least a team trying to be high performing. And then you can think about, you know, the opposite, where people are not involved, they're not focused, they might not even like what this team or what it's supposed to do, and all the micro actions of the individual sort of demonstrate this. And then of course you would have a team that you would be talking about as uninvolved or low performing and so on. So what we're trying to say here is that you need to look at both these perspectives when you work with the collective. But they all relate. All these four capabilities or factors relate to each other. And here are some examples. Of course, you know, if you then have a reflection, a high quality reflection, that will help to develop the representation. And then on the other hand, as we talked about, the representation by what it sort of sends, the message it sends to its members, may influence commitment. As we talked about, effective commitment comes from, you know, a person understanding the situation or the organization in a way that sort of relates to his or her personal values or ideas and so on. And then, of course, integration, individual behavior that will affect the patterns of the group and hence the climate of the group, for example. The climate of the group, the relationships, we know affects the learning behavior, so that a warm group basically has higher levels of learning behavior. And then again, the representation will influence what is reflected upon, because what is contained within the representation will trigger different kinds of reflections. And communication between individuals upholds the representation. Reflections can, of course, develop the relationships within the team. If you have a good session of reflection where you're really listening to people and see different perspectives and so on, it will enable people to develop their thoughts about each other and ultimately relationship and so on. So you can see basically all the four factors have a relationship to each other, and it's doubled and it goes back and forth. It's sort of they all influence each other. So I try to illustrate that with this picture. You have what's called a dynamic relationship, which means that you can't really see, maybe it's a better perspective to see this as some kind of constantly mobile or moving phenomena that is in different states of equilibrium, and then things trigger changes in these movements, which also changes the equilibrium of the process. That's a way of understanding these spirals that I was talking about, that certain behavior in a group can initiate a negative spiral or a positive spiral, or just freeze a pattern also, so that the group sort of starts becoming more predictable because it has a distinct pattern, which as human beings we like predictability, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we like the specific pattern. Right. So that's the model, and if we summarize things, what we're trying to say in this book and in this theory is that collective intelligence can be seen as based on four system factors. Reflection capability is the ability of the system to engage in both problem settings and problem solving, and to skillfully and coordinated switch between these two states of reasoning. Relationship capability is the system ability to develop relationships that supports open knowledge exchange and learning. Representation capability is the system's ability to create and act upon a representation of the task, the environment, the resources available, and so on, and this representation then having requisite variety for the task. It contains enough information, ideas, perspective, resources, and so on, so that you can work efficiently with the task. Integration capability then is the ability of the individuals in the system to dynamically and with heed coordinate its knowledge resources and uphold its knowledge processes. So the last capability is actually pointing towards the behaviors of the individuals in the system and in what way they are supporting this system to and its need of coordination. And all these four factors, as I said, have a dynamic relationship, which means that any factor can destabilize the system, but it also means that any of these factors can change the pattern if it becomes locked down in a negative pattern or an inefficient pattern. Well, that's the theory at least. Thank you.